in Toronto. And I've discovered that several young women from Berlin went to this same college. The letter was written during her first month there. My favorite line is, Miss Deal is always giving us little lectures. This morning it was about using slang, and yesterday about being modest. We always have to get behind the screen when we dress. In 1910, Hilda was immortalized in the picture above when she was asked to present the ceremonial button. This is a special button, to Ontario's Premier and the future Sir Adam Beck, when the hydroelectric power from Niagara Falls was turned on in Berlin. She eventually gets married when she's 25 to a bank clerk. And she comes back to the forefront in 1960. She's 69 years old, and they do a recreation of the hydroelectric moment. She gets to bring the button again at age 69. I often guessed correctly that a recipe had been contributed by a young woman, based on its style. Miss Catherine Fisher was the household science teacher at Berlin High School. So this is a newly established department and class. She and her students used the more modern style of exact measurements and an orderly description of method. The Department of Manual Training and Household Science was new, and it was considered one of the best in the province. The picture is of a domestic science classroom that I showed earlier actually comes from a ladies' college like the one that Hilda attended. But this group photo is teachers at another local school. Can you see what they're eating? Bananas, yeah. The local fruit store, Longo's, promoted them month after month after month in the newspaper. I don't know whether this was to get people to have them or they just had a really good deal on bananas all the time. It appears that Berlin was fortunate to have Miss Fisher. She was being quoted by other writers in domestic science and soon moved to New York City. I am not certain what she was doing there initially, but on several occasions she was asked to suggest candidates for the faculty of McDonald Institute that we were hearing about earlier in Guelph. She'd been a student there. I'm still looking for records on her, but I have found that statement. Just found it yesterday. The last appearance I found for her is in New York City. She's a features editor for the Ladies' Home Journal, one of the most popular women's magazines in Canada as well as the United States. I'm going to continue to research Miss Catherine Fisher, as she seems particularly fascinating. Part of the home economics coursework at McDonald Institute included sewing as well as cooking. It also included dairying as an option. The women of Berlin didn't seem to go for that one. Several young women from Berlin took the 3-month short course, and most opted for an elective called shirtwaists. There were also millinery courses available for making hats. There were at least 3 millinery shops in Berlin in 1906. Tailor shops were usually a male domain, but women were sometimes hired to sew specific items. Seamstresses might work for someone else or be self-employed. One of the women that I'd like to meet, and I'm often asked about that, who do you most want to know, is Mrs. Elizabeth Blau. I made her recipes for vegetable soup and mayonnaise dressing. They weren't extraordinary, they were okay. But I found her story fascinating. I want to know how it ended. All I have is a beginning and a middle. She was 38 when her recipes were included in the cookbook, but she started life as Mary Elizabeth Cressman, a Mennonite who married a Methodist farmer named Joseph Emerson Blau in 1882 in Palmerston. Their eldest daughter, Mabel Magdalena Verdella Blau, it's a mouthful. I don't think she wrote that very often. She was born soon afterwards in the community of Lebanon in Wellington County. Their second daughter, Mildred, was born a few years later, and Joseph is listed as a carpenter on her birth certificate. In 10 years, their life changes, and I don't know why. Because in the 1901 census, it's just 2 family members together, and they're living in Berlin. They've gone from Palmerston to Berlin, and 2 of them aren't there. Elizabeth Blau is 33 years old and living with her 15-year-old daughter, Mabel, as lodgers in the home of Albert and Catherine Schneider. The Schneiders have 2 babies, a 1-year-old and one that's 2 months old, and there are 2 more female lodgers in this house. Elizabeth is listed as married rather than widowed, and she is a seamstress. Like the women pictured in this photo, the Schneiders are Mennonite and the Blaus are Presbyterian. So Mennonite to Methodist to Presbyterian. The lodgers are Irish and Presbyterian too, and they're seamstresses as well. I'm still wondering what happened to Mr. Blau. How did Mary Elizabeth end up on her own by age 33, and where is 12-year-old Mildred? By the 1911 census, Mabel has married, and they have 2 little ones. Their household in Berlin includes a woman named Mary Blau, who is listed as Herbert's mother-in-law. I think this is probably Elizabeth. And it is hard to read the writing of the census taker. I'm not sure if I'm reading W for widow or M for married. There is also 21-year-old Mildred. She's listed as a sister. I imagine this is Mabel's sister. Strangely, the 2 Blau women are listed as servants in a private home. I really hope that they are not servants in her own daughter's house. I talked recently at a genealogy event in Wellington County, and a man there told me that Palmerston as a railway town, like many railway places, was notorious for having men abandon women. They would just take off on the railway and work. I've already talked about some women who were wives and mothers, but I've created a separate category for the women who would have identified strongly with this role when they contributed their recipes. Mrs. H.F. Pearson is pictured in this photograph with her children. The future Mrs. H.F. Pearson was Agnes Blair Gibson. Her father was a farmer, and so was her mother. Agnes married a dentist, Carolyn, on August 10, 1887. They had 2 children. In the 1901 census, the household of Harry, Agnes, and the 2 kids, it also includes a servant. I imagine their household was much the same in 1906. But in 3 years, Agnes's world changes. Her husband dies at age 53 of cerebral hemorrhage. By the 1920s, her daughter is married to a member of the Seagram family, and her son has experienced love at first sight with a woman visiting from BC. They soon head off to Costa Rica, where he is working. Now, Agnes writes the following letter to the mother of her new daughter-in-law. This woman is also a widow. I'm going to read an excerpt from the letter as it provides insight into her character and her role as mother. My dear Mrs. Henderson, I have been promising myself to write to you ever since those dear children left for their home in the South. But we have one visitor after another and the time has flown. My sister writes from Vancouver, wonders if we have any idea what a sacrifice this has been for you. I mean, parting with your daughter. I think I have some idea of what it means, and I do sympathize with you. Still, I am selfish enough to be so happy over it all, and so very thankful to you for bringing up such a lovely girl for my darling boy. I feel sure he will know how to appreciate her. I could never explain to you how much easier it was to see him go this time because he had such a companion. Dorothy at last has a sister. She always wanted one. Gibson, that was what her son was called, was so full of Dr. Henderson when he returned. I'm just sorry they are so far separated. Poor boy, he has never had much fatherly companionship, and he yearns for it, I know. He's been a good son, nevertheless. We've been separated for years, and a mother is always anxious, I think, until her children are settled. Remember me kindly. Believe me, sincerely yours, Agnes Pearson. Excuse me. I'm going to move on to factory women. The story of Agnes has a rather sad bit to it, but we'll skip that today. So do some of the factory women. Many of the women contributing recipes worked in factories at the time this cookbook was published, or had worked in one before marriage. Berlin has often been considered unique due to the number of working women. Many of the factories relied on female labor, particularly in the button and shirt factories, but also stenographers in other factories and businesses. There were also women working as clerks in stores. The women in these pictures aren't named, but perhaps Miss Susanna Matilda Albert could have been one of these women. She was 26 and working in a shirt factory when she contributed 2 recipes, one for chocolate tapioca, so-so, and the other for orange float, which was a disaster. She was raised Mennonite, and as far as I can tell, she never married. Miss Florence Cook is an example of one of the stenographers, although she's not in this picture as far as I know. When the cookbook was published, Florence was 16, living with her parents and younger brother. By 1911, she is a stenographer in a leather factory, and her brother works as a bank clerk. Her father is the Berlin fire chief, but he's added building inspection to his list. A few years later, Florence becomes the stenographer at Kaufman Rubber, and her father works at Dominion Butter Factory. Florence doesn't just work, though. She does get to travel a bit. There's a record of her crossing the border from Sarnia to Port Huron, Michigan in 1916 when she's 26. Her destination, Grand Rapids, Michigan. And that's as much as I've learned about her so far. The cookbook states that recipes are from Berlin, Waterloo, and friends elsewhere. Some of the women live in neighboring counties, but others are much further away. How did a woman in Port Arthur, called Thunder Bay today, or Montreal, or Alabama, end up sending a recipe? I've found some connections, but others remain a mystery. Most of the recipes come from women in urban centers, but a few do live in rural areas. Emma Shank contributed a very delicious recipe for nut cookies, and she was from Ayton, Ontario in Grey County. The 1901 census has 14-year-old Emma living here with her parents. Her father's a farmer, 5 brothers and 3 sisters, plus 2 hired men. And based on the name and location that are with this recipe, I think when she contributed it, 18-year-old Emma was still single and living in Ayton. Since she's Lutheran and there are Shanks in Berlin, I suspect that's the connection. I also wondered if she'd been working in Berlin in one of the factories or as a servant and still considered it in the home. I think she must have married. I haven't been able to find her in anything else. And that's the case with many of these women. Either I can find them when they're married or single. I can find brief parts of their life and no more. But even those brief bits are little snippets into the life of women in 1906. There are also the people I call the invisible women. The recipe for Swiss beef steak that you had today was contributed by Miss Mary Hannah. She's a representative of this group. The women in this picture are nameless. The women named in the Berlin cookbook aren't easy to find anywhere else. I had assumed that the surname Hannah would be kind of unique. But there are 31 women and girls in Ontario in 1901 named Mary Hannah. None of them are in Waterloo County, Berlin. All of those ones are married or they're just too young to have contributed a recipe. So I'm still continuing to look for clues. I think she might be from Wellington County, but I don't know. Sadly, this is the case for far too many of the women. I had assumed it would be easy to find single women. Most times, their first name is listed as well as their last name. But they've become the most frustrating. Somehow they slip between the cracks. Either their names don't appear at the census in Berlin, or there are just too many possibilities, or not enough information. If they arrived and left Berlin in the 10 years between the 2 censuses of 01 and 11, they are invisible for me. The population of Berlin was very fluid during these years. Factories came and went, and often the employees went with them. City directories don't usually list every member of a household at this point, and often not the female members. Researching the women and their families brings many highs and lows. Women who had humble beginnings and then ended up quite well off, or lows like financial turnarounds, or worst of all, the deaths of children, husbands, or themselves. But I have so far figured out a few things. Just about every Christian mainstream denomination is represented. These women belong to 2 different branches of the Lutheran Church: Presbyterian, Methodist, Mennonite, Swedenborgian, Catholic, and even a Christian Scientist contributed a recipe. They are all white as far as I can tell, but their ethnicity may be German, English, Scottish, Danish, all sorts of things. Marital status: everything under the sun: single, married, widowed, and even one who's legally separated. Age range: the youngest, I think, is 15 when she contributes a recipe, and the oldest is over 70. Economic status: one of the contributors is the child of a street sweeper, and others are the wives of the wealthiest factory owners in town. Most are urban, but some had rural roots. I'm continuing to look at these people, trying to find out more about them and why they contributed that particular recipe. Sometimes I can tell from the recipe, like a potato soup. It was so simple and plain, I thought, probably this is a woman who doesn't have a lot of money. It turned out to be a single woman and her mother, living on very little as far as I could tell. Other times,